Now, franchises are the lifeblood that keeps the lights on in Hollywood, and so what do studios hate more than anything else? Well, endings, especially endings which, for one reason or another, close the door on a movie series. Sometimes the creators decide that they want to wrap things up, perhaps ailing box office grosses force producers to begrudgingly accept their franchise's inevitable demise, or the filmmakers simply just do something so misguided that it derails the IP overnight. All and more are valid reasons to end up on this list. So let's get on with it. I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 movie endings that killed movie franchises for good. Number 10. Neo and Trinity run The Matrix. The Matrix Resurrections. There were many who hoped, or at least assumed, that The Matrix Resurrections was intended to kickstart a new trilogy of Matrix movies led by a younger cast of characters, not unlike Star Wars The Force Awakens. But director Lana Wachowski couldn't have made her disinterest in The Matrix as an ongoing franchise any clearer. Throughout Resurrections, Wachowski took a number of meta jabs at Warner Brothers and the soullessness of modern blockbuster IPs in general, basically confessing in the middle of the movie that she only came back for a fourth film because the studio was going to make it without her regardless. And so, Resurrections ends with antagonist the Analyst being summarily defeated and Neo and Trinity rebuilding the Matrix in their own image, both of them now apparently being versions of the One, which would make them the Two. Given that Wachowski has further stated that she has no interest in sequels, and Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss have both said that they wouldn't return without her involvement, there's really no place for the series to go after this. With all major conflicts resolved, while Neo and Trinity are positioned as a basically unstoppable superhero pairing, the four-film arc feels neatly tied off. It's just as well, given that Resurrections was also a colossal box office bomb. While it's inevitable that Warner Brothers will reboot The Matrix with an entirely new cast and crew years from now, the franchise as we know it is basically capped in the head by Resurrections ending, and Wachowski evidently wouldn't have had it any other way. Number 9. Michael Corleone dies. The Godfather Part 3. Sometimes a franchise just reaches a natural endpoint when the character at the top of the pyramid dies, and that is absolutely the case with The Godfather, which expired alongside its protagonist Michael Corleone in the third movie. The divisive threequel concludes with Michael's daughter Mary being assassinated before we leap forward almost 2 decades to an elderly Michael dying alone. Though it's worth noting that Francis Ford Coppola's 2020 re-edit actually cut Michael's death, replacing it with him simply living in solitude in old age, the original ending is still the one that most people know. More to the point, Part 3 brought the series to a literal dead stop back in 1990. Slamming the door on the prospect of a sequel. And yet, following Part 3's polarizing initial response, the director did consider making a fourth film which would adopt the prequel format of Part 2, focusing again on a young Vito Corleone. But between the author of the source material's death and the general lack of audience interest in more Godfather movies, the director ultimately appreciated that he'd killed the thing off with Part 3. Number 8. Rambo literally rides off into the sunset. Rambo Last Blood. There's a solid argument to be made that Rambo really shouldn't have ever been a franchise at all. The original First Blood was such a potent, effective thriller about post-war trauma, but the sequels quickly descended into empty-headed, ultra-violent schlock. And so it was something of a relief that 2019's Rambo Last Blood categorically closed the book on John Rambo's journey, not by killing him, but by having him scarcely survive and then literally ride off into the sunset at the end. In the movie's end credits, we see a wounded Rambo saddle up his horse and ride off, intercut with a montage of footage from the 4 previous Rambo movies, making it categorically clear that the then 73-year-old Stallone was finally sunsetting the action icon. It's just as well, given that Last Blood was by far the lowest grossing entry into the series, and in addition to negative reviews, was even disparaged by First Blood author David Morrell. Though Stallone hasn't entirely ruled out a 6th film, between Last Blood's ending, Stallone's age, and the general reception of the 5th film, John Rambo's time is clearly over. Number 7. The Death of Michael Myers. Halloween 2, 2009. It was fully assumed that Rob Zombie's rebooted Halloween franchise would just keep on going for as long as fans kept on turning up to watch it, but the filmmaker, well, he had other ideas. Zombie, who in his own words had a miserable experience battling the Weinsteins on his 2007 Halloween film, reluctantly agreed to return for Halloween 2, but in doing so decided to curb stomp the franchise's longevity in the most drastic, definitive means possible. Though the theatrical and director's cut of Halloween 2 differ slightly, both of them conclude with the unambiguous demise of Michael Myers. The director's cut goes even further in its pursuit of finality by additionally killing off Laurie Strode, leaving nobody alive to carry the franchise's mantle. While the Weinsteins could have easily just hired another director to helm a 3rd Halloween which retconned Michael's death, and it wouldn't be the first time the series had pulled this card after all, between Zombie's closed-off ending and the film's lackluster box office performance, they instead decided to put the IP on ice for a good while. With Zombie's Halloween being categorically violently snuffed out after just 2 movies, the series sat dormant for almost an entire decade before David Gordon Green's 2018 film returned to the original Jamie Lee Curtis starring continuity. Number 6. Tom Cruise becomes a superhero. The Mummy. Tom Cruise's The Mummy evaporated from the collective pop culture consciousness so fast one can scarcely believe that it only came out 5 years ago. The reboot was intended to kickstart a new cinematic universe. Great, another one, centered around classic Universal monsters called the Dark Universe. But in an infamous case of a studio putting the cart firmly before the horse, The Mummy decimated the prospective franchise before it even really got going. If the movie as a whole was panned for its thoroughly naff script, and even a weirdly somnambulant performance from Cruise, what sealed its fate in the eyes of many was a deeply baffling ending that few could have seen coming. At film's end, Cruise's protagonist Nick Morton becomes fused with Set, the ancient Egyptian god of death, effectively giving him all of the Mummy's supernatural abilities, yet without any of the accompanying evil. Basically, they turned Tom Cruise into a damn superhero, and thought that this would be a compelling setup for a Mummy sequel. Instead, it came off as a cynical attempt to cash in on the popularity of superhero movies, rather than simply making a compelling Mummy movie that people actually wanted to see more of. This baffling head-scratcher of an ending no doubt helped annihilate the film's word of mouth, ensuring that it grossly underperformed at the box office and subsequently caused Universal to scrap the entire Dark Universe. Ouch. Number 5. Wolverine dies. Logan. Though Logan wasn't actually the last entry into Fox's X-Men franchise, it nevertheless represented the artistic and spiritual death of the series in every way that matters. James Mangold's thrilling superhero western was admittedly positioned as a tangential alt future for the X-Men series, in which no mutants have been born for about 25 years and that those who remain are living on the fringes of society. Logan's masterstroke ultimately was in finally retiring Hugh Jackman's Wolverine in a highly affecting and fitting manner, having him sacrifice himself to get a group of superpowered children, including Laura aka X-23, to safety. The film ends with Logan quite literally dead and buried, with there being no prospect of his return, and considering that Jackman has always been the heart and the soul of Fox's X-Men series, it marked the point at which most fans took their leave. Though Dark Phoenix and the New Mutants were released in the years that followed, for most they felt like afterthoughts, especially once Disney's acquisition of Fox and the inevitable integration of the X-Men into the MCU had been announced. Unsurprisingly, both films bombed at the box office, and poor reviews only confirmed them to be the series' post-Logan death rattle. Number 4. Angela finally escapes. Rec 4 Apocalypse. The Spanish horror film franchise Rec is quite the strange beast indeed. The first two entries were well received by fans, with Rec 2 ending on a cliffhanger where protagonist Angela was shown being infected by a parasitic organism. But Rec 3 Genesis bafflingly ditched the Angela storyline to tell a parallel tale which was received with fair indifference by most fans, who instead obviously eager to see Angela's fate resolved. Thankfully, Rec 4 Apocalypse was a direct sequel to the second film, bringing her back into the fold for a finale which sought to resolve her fate, and despite mixed reviews overall, that it certainly did. Though Rec 4 ends with the parasite being swallowed by a fish in the ocean, crucially, Angela is finally free of it and escapes with her life intact. Sure, a fifth film could have conceivably followed a new host of characters battling the parasite, but between the series' waning level of audience interest and Angela's arc finally being complete, the filmmakers clearly saw the writing on the wall and ended the franchise at this point. Number 3. Burt Gummer Bites It. Tremors Shrieker Island. The unexpected longevity of the Tremors franchise sure is something. After Kevin Bacon decided to only stick around for the 1990 original, protagonist duties fell to the late, great Fred, who himself bailed after the second film. Then the protagonist role shifted to Burt Gummer, the eccentric survivalist and conspiracy theorist introduced in the first Tremors. Against all odds, the series actually managed to survive past its two original heroes exiting, largely due to Michael Gross's thoroughly entertaining performance as fan-favorite character Gummer. Gummer ultimately became the face of the franchise, enough so that a seventh film, Tremors Shrieker Island, was released in 2020. However, Shrieker Island also categorically closed the lid on the series by killing Gummer off in an act of self-sacrifice at movie's end. The fact that Tremors survived decades longer than anyone expected to is frankly a miracle, but with the franchise's long-standing stalwart now dead, there's very little commercial prospect on an eighth Tremors. One can assume that the home video grosses dried up enough that Universal decided to put the series out to pasture in the most ultimate way possible. Number 2. Rama is done. The Raid 2. The Raid 2 is an interesting one because at the time of its release, no one realized that it would be the ending for the series. Audience enthusiasm for Gareth Evans' brilliantly crafted Indonesian action thrillers was so high that everybody just assumed that he would at the very least make a Raid trilogy, and that was certainly part of Evans' original plan, enough that he still talked up plans for the Raid 3 after the second film's release. Yet, in the years that followed, Evans admitted that he lost enthusiasm for a third Raid, between moving back to the UK from Indonesia and feeling that Rama's story ended pretty neatly in the Raid 2. And he's absolutely right. The Raid 2 ends with the mob kingpin offering Rama a deal, presumably to join his outfit, only for Rama to curtly reply, "I'm done," before Evans cuts abruptly to black. It's such an efficient, no-nonsense way to wrap up Rama's story, so it's easy to appreciate why Evans wouldn't want to unpick that for a third go-around. While you can argue that Evans basically wrote himself into a corner with the Raid 2's ending, it's clear from his recent directing work, particularly on hit TV show Gangs of London, that he wanted to try other things. And number 1, Lindsay Lohan kills Charlie Sheen. Scary Movie 5. For a good while, the Scary Movie franchise seemed like it would never die. The films were made so cheaply and produced such gargantuan profits at the box office that there wasn't any real incentive to stop, beyond preserving our collective sanity, of course. But the series was finally put out to pasture with Scary Movie 5, released in 2013, which ensured that anyone with any faith left in the franchise had it violently snuffed out. If having Lindsay Lohan and Charlie Sheen play not-so-fictional versions of themselves in the film wasn't enough of a sign of creative bankruptcy, Scary Movie 5 ended with a groaner of a finale in which Sheen was hit with a car and killed. The driver, Lindsay Lohan. It was the straw that finally broke the franchise's back, and though Scary Movie 5 still turned a decent enough profit relative to its budget, it ended up grossing less than half of the fourth film. As a result, Scary Movie died at number 5, and with the spoof genre losing prominence amidst the rise of meme culture in recent years, it's actually remained dead for almost an entire decade. And there we go, my friends. Those were 10 movie endings that killed franchises for good. I hope that you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comments section below. As always, I've been Jules. You can go follow me over on Twitter at RetroJ with a 0, or you can swing by Instagram where it's the same handle, RetroJ, but the O is a 0. Hope to see you over there. But before I go, I just want to say one thing. I hope you're treating yourself well with love and respect, my friend, because you are the franchise that I want to see carry on right on into that sunset for a long old while, all right? So remember to be kind to yourself. Remember that you deserve all the best things in life, and also remember that no one has any right to tell you otherwise. You are a massive ledge, all right? Now go out there and absolutely smash it. As always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.